Hi class, welcome back. So right now we are going to discuss adolescence. So previously we were able to discuss about school age and preschool and infancy. So right now we are going to discuss another new lesson called adolescence. So again, I'm your professor here, Miss Celine, and I'll be discussing this new lesson. So to further, before we discuss, let's go on the topics that we are going to, or the sections that we are going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the introduction, of course, and then followed by the developmental theories, the key hormones that influence our development, the normal growth and development. That includes the height, growth spurt, weight, body composition, and also sexual development. So please take note that I've used Papalia and Sandrock book. So it's also the one that is the reference in the board exam. So basically this is just the summary of both books. So I compress it in this presentation. So however, I will no longer discuss on the biological aspect that much because I'll be focusing on the developmental aspect in terms of psychology. Alright, so to introduce this subject, again, we are going to discuss here the adolescence. Alright, so what now is adolescence? So I'll be reading it first per bullet, and then I'll be discussing it one by one. So first, adolescence is a transitional period between childhood and adulthood, marked by dramatic growth in physical, psychological, social, cognitive, and moral development. So in here, please take note that this is the transition period between childhood and adulthood. So this is the stage where a lot of individuals are now experiencing different changes in their bodies and also in their environment. So this is the time where a lot of individuals also are having a hard time to adjust to their environment, because this is now the stage where you will now become an adult eventually. Hormonally driven physiologic changes occur at this stage. So for women, a lot of hormones are now starting to appear, and with that, a lot of mood changes also is being evident in a woman and also in their physical aspect. So a mark of puberty is also evident, and we're going to discuss about that. And normal growth and development. So what are the normal growth and development? But so those are the things that we need to remember. Again, I want you to remember that this is the transition period from childhood to adulthood. Alright, so now let's go to the developmental theories. The first one is the developmental theory of Freud, which is the psychosexual development. So please remember that before we were able to discuss infancy, their psychological or psychosexual stage is oral, and then the 2 to 3rd year of life, that includes anal and phallic. So in here, we are now going thoroughly on what does an adolescent experiences during the psychosexual stage of development according to Freud. Alright, so now let's continue. There is a rapid development of sexual organs and maturation of the sexual capacities, genital and heterosexual interests and activities. So in here, so if we have the four stages, the first 4 stages of psychosexual development by Freud during the first years of life, or the first few years of life, now we are now talking about the genitals area, or the genitals stage of Freud, because in here, everything is about their heterosexual interests and also activities that is now focused on their environment. So, and here, according to Freud, this is actually one of the healthiest because unlike oral, anal, phallic, and latency, in here there are not so much fixation. Unlike oral, you can get if you get fixated, you might grow smoking. In anal, if you are too much, if you have fixation in here, you will be either too messy or too organized. And in phallic, if you are in here, we have the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, and then latency towards the classmates. And right now we have the genitals, which according to Freud is actually a very a healthy stage. However, there are some fixations as well, but not that severe, unlike the first few years. So now we are going to talk about the sexual behavior. So according to Freud. Now let's continue. So in this presentation, I actually divided the stages of adolescence from early, middle, and also late. So let's go first on the early adolescence. The early adolescence started from 11 to 13 years old. So you can just remember at this stage that this is actually the start of the teenage years. All right, so in here, heightened interest in sex and sexual anatomy, normally compares themselves with others, and also ejaculation, masturbation, and nocturnal emissions occur for the first time may cause anxiety. So in here, the adolescent now tries to compare their body figures with their friends, both for female and also for male. Actually, during this stage, some of the females are actually being so critical about themselves, if they're developing pimples, if they don't think that they're pretty enough. So this is actually a critical stage for female, and for male actually a little bit, because they are actually focusing on their height during this stage. So in here, both sexes or both gender are now actually trying to understand their themselves and also their anatomy, their sexual anatomy. Some of them are very curious. Oh, how does this work? What if I touch myself? Or what will happen to me if this things, or I touch this or that? So this is actually a very critical stage of exploration about their sexual organs. Sexual intercourse as early as 13 years old in some. So because of their heightened interest in sexuality, some actually engage now in sexual intercourse. Masturbating together can happen. Isolated incidents of mutual sex exploration are not necessarily a sign of homosexuality. In here, this is the stage where a female can actually start to be curious on their friends' sexual organs as well. So sometimes they touch it, but that doesn't mean that they are homosexual. This is just because of their interest, their deep interest, and how the sex organs actually are or is, and they're now actually comparing. Sometimes it's some of the individuals actually tend to compare their for example, for the male, so they are now curious why is their penis looks like that, and it's different to their friends, and many more. And same with females. So the question would be, have they started menstruating, and many more. Alright, so now let's go to the middle adolescence. So the middle adolescence actually ranges from 14 to 18 years old. So what happens in here is, let's go to it one by one. First, the biologic maturation and social pressures determine sexual activity. So in here, because of the influence of their friends, and also of the people that they admire actually, their action towards sexual activity are now being influenced. So sometimes, even though they still don't think or they don't want to date because of social pressures, they are now starting to date. And actually, it reflects on their self-esteem as well. So this would happen on this stage. And then homosexual experimentation is common and does not necessarily reflect the child's ultimate sexual orientation. So in here, some of homosexual activities are being done, but it doesn't mean that, again, they are homosexual. It's just that they're very much interested on the sexual organs. Adolescents begin to sort out other important aspects of sexual identity, beliefs about love, honesty, and propriety. So in here, adolescents now started to date other, for example, the opposite sex, or they are now trying to experiment and then look for what interests them the most. Are they interested more on their of the opposite sex, or someone who is of the same sex? But of course, in here, some things can change. So some individuals might think that they are homosexuals because they are engaging in homosexual activities at early in this stage, but actually they are not. It's just that they're very much interested in that. But during this stage, it's too early to say if someone is actually homosexual. Dating is usually superficial at this age, emphasizing attractiveness and sexual experimentation rather than intimacy. So in here, like what I've mentioned a while ago, from this age, from the middle adolescence, from 14 to 18 years old, adolescent individuals are now started to court some of their classmates and actually start to date. But in here, the focus is actually more on attractiveness and actually just curious on how it feels like to have sex with someone. Excuse me. But the intimacy is not yet there. So in here, it's more on the physical aspect and on the curiosity of having someone and also being sexually related to someone. Next one is many know some of the risks of pregnancy, AIDS, and STD, but knowledge does not control behavior. So in here, some of the schools are now, since dating is now rising in this part of adolescent, so now schools and other organizations are now putting up information about pregnancy, AIDS, and STDs. However, due to uncontrollable curiosity and lack of lack of knowledge of the use of condoms and contraceptives, the spread of AIDS and STD are still there, and teenage pregnancy is also present. So next we have the late adolescence. So the late adolescence actually ranging actually this starts typically from 18 to 19, but in here it's written from 17 to 19. So please do not be confused on that. So on the middle adulthood, we have 14 to 18, but it coincides with the late adolescence from 17 to 19. Later on, you'll realize why, and I'll tell you why is it that it coincide, overlap each other. But first, let's focus now on late adolescence. On the late adolescence, sexual experimentation decreases. Concepts such as adoption of stable sexual identities. Relationships become increasingly involved in love and commitment. So here in late adolescence, since now they're in early adolescence and also in middle adolescence, they were able to experiment on their sexes. Now they're now trying to decide what or which gender they will go through. Actually, this is will be discussed furthermore in the psychosocial stages of Erik Erikson. But for now, that's it. That's actually the transition, and this is the very important aspect of a teenager or an adolescent, because if an adolescent was able to identify him or herself as a trans, and the society or the people around them that they are asking them or letting them to actually or encouraging them to actually transition into a trans, and even though they're not still sure about themselves, this is actually a very critical stage. There are a lot of stories online and also in the researchers that some of the adolescents are actually regretting later in their life that they transition at this stage, because again, that's why psychiatric clearance and psychologist clearance are very much important before someone undergoes an operation, because of the confusion that one adolescent might have during this stage. All right, so now let's go to psychosocial development of Erik Erikson. All right, so now in Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages, actually this stage now is focused on identity versus role confusion. So I've mentioned a while ago, why is role confusion part of the struggle in the psychosocial stages of Erik Erikson? Is because of the deep curiosity about one's sex and also the opposite sex, and also the different behaviors that one is experiencing by themselves. So again, the rise of masturbation, the curiosity of one's sexual organ, and the others. But again, because of that, there are individuals are actually engaging in homosexual activities, but actually it adds up on the confusion one an individual is having during this stage. Again, according to psychosocial stages of development of Erik Erikson, this is the stage between identity versus role confusion. So in here, establishing a stable sense of identity, including separation from the family of origin, initiation of intimacy, and third, realistic planning for independence. Alongside with identity is that it's not just only focused on sexual orientation, but it also focuses on the search for oneself. So that's why an individual now tends to shift away from their family and try to look for themselves, but it's not that very evident. So other individuals are actually experiencing it unconsciously. But in here, part of their search on their identity is shifting away from their family. And then initiation of intimacy, because finding love, of course, finding love outside their families as well. And then planning for their independence. So according to, this is actually a part of, in the United States, where a lot of freshmen in college are actually moving out and then looking for an apartment or dorm near their school. This is actually the stage, and this is also that's actually one of the root cause of this concept. All right, so now let's dig deeper on the different adolescence stages. So first, let's go to early adolescence. Again, this ranges from 11 to 13 years old. In here, there's an increased self-consciousness because of somatic transformation. Second, self-awareness centers on external characteristics. And third, preoccupied with body changes, scrutinizes one's appearance. So I've already mentioned this a while ago that this is a critical stage because a lot of females are now focusing on their appearance, how they look like, are they having acne, and for the boys, they're actually now very much critical about their height, their looks as well, are they strong enough, and many more. So this is actually a stage of self-consciousness and self-awareness on their own characteristic and comparing them to the outside environment. So this is actually the stage of also being confident about themselves, and also the struggle in here is actually about loving themselves, especially in a physical way, and being confident on how they look like. Here feels everyone is staring at them. Elkind's imaginary audience phenomena, which is according to David Elkind. So in here, in adolescent stage, according to Elkind, there is this phenomenon, Elkind's phenomenon, where an adolescent actually feels like everyone is staring at them or is judging them. So this is actually a phenomenon, and because of this, a lot of adolescents are actually having or are actually very critical of themselves because of this. Excuse me. Development of distorted sense of femininity due to the influence of the media. So like eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, and depressions are now being developed. So in here, at the age of 11 to 13 years old, like what I've said, a lot of teenagers are now very critical about how they look. So a lot of disorders relating to the physical appearance are now also evident and is rising during this age because of the advertisements in the TV. The more the skinnier you are, the whiter you are here in our country, the more taller you are, the more attractive you can be. So those advertisements actually affects a lot to the adolescent. Now let's continue on the middle adolescence. That's 14 to 18 years old. So in here, more accepting of their own body changes, become preoccupied with idealism and exploring future options. Affiliation with a peer group is an important step in confirming one's identity and self-image. And lastly is peer groups exert lesser interest over dress, activities, and behavior. So in here, during the 14 to 18 years old, they are now focused on joining actually different peer groups. So in this stage, actually a lot of adolescents are now joining, for example, youth groups, youth in their churches, organizations, and activism. Actually, this is the stage where a lot of them actually joins. This actually helps them identify themselves to that respective group. So if they join a specific group, like for example a church group, so they will now start to identify themselves in that group. So they're now focused on that. Peer and environment actually helps them identify themselves. So and also they are now having this realization that their dress and activities and behavior actually doesn't affect that much, and what's important is how they are being perceived by others depending on their affiliation. So and also because of that, they are now being idealistic of their future options, which is good because this is the stage where they're about to go to college. So this is the middle adolescence. Philosophize about the meaning of life, experiments with different personas, intense feeling of internal turmoil and misery. So like what I've mentioned a while ago, this is the stage where an adolescent joins different peer groups or groups to help them identify themselves within that group. And because of that, they philosophize a lot of things about life and experiment on different personas, like, okay, so I'm attending now church. Maybe in the church, I'll be, since the church is telling me that I should be acting like this, and then they would now shift on being like that. And then when they realize that it's not working and it's not for them, they will now shift to another one. So they would pretend now to be a smart person. So they would now engage in different social media conversations just to prove that they belong and to have their self-confidence and find their identity as well. In late adolescence, that's 17 to 19 years old, cognition tends to be less self-centered, increasing thoughts about justice, patriotism, and history, often idealistic but may also be absolutist and intolerant of opposing views. So and here in late adolescence, this is the more intense one. So in the first one, they are now starting to experiment on, or I mean the middle adolescence is they are now experimenting or finding their identity within that group. In here, they are now focusing on being that part of the group and then living on the values of that group. So that's why a lot of individuals during at this stage are called idealistic because of that. Like what I've mentioned in middle adolescence is that they are now joining different religious groups, and here they are now actually being immersed in that group and actually living in that living on the ways of that group. So in here, religious or political groups, the promise answers to complex questions that may hold great appeal. So in here, they believe on the values of that group, they live with that group, their the tenets of their personality or the behavior rather is surrounded and influenced with that group. So body image is stable because of the slowing physical changes. So their physical image by then is now stable, and because of that, they are now more accepting on how they look. All right, so now we are going to continue on cognitive development. That's according to Piaget. So let's continue. So now we are going to the formal operational thought period. So we have sensory motor, pre-operational, operational, and also the formal. So in formal operational thought period, logical thinking and the ability to reason introduce theoretical hypothesis and systematic approach to problems. So in here, the logic, the curiosity of the research and the theories and many more are now very evident on the adolescents. So that's why they are now joining church groups, different organizations, and many more because of this cognitive development. Okay, so let's go one by one again. So in early adolescence, that's 11 to 13 years old, transition from concrete operational thinking to formal logical operations or abstract thought is now being evident. So, ability to treat possibilities as real entities may be related to critical decisions like risk-taking behaviors such as unprotected sex is also evident. So in here, they are now very spontaneous, they wanted to do things, they wanted to be done, and many more. Because they are now very curious and their cognitive process are now very hyped at this stage. When emotional stakes are high, magical thinking such as conviction and vulnerability may interfere with higher cognition. Cognitive development due to increased knowledge, experience, and cognitive efficiency are also present. So in here, though the individual in here may act logically but are still emotional, so their decision making are a bit shaky as well because of that. And then we have the middle adolescents, that's 14 to 18 years old. So the middle adolescent question and analyze intensively. So questioning our moral conventions, anything I want is right. So in here, they are now being straightforward and they are actually more on their side of themselves. The tendency of they are always right is there as well, and others are wrong. So if you saw an individual or an adolescent during at this stage, 14 to 18 years old, they are the ones in social media that I'm trying, where they're actually very pushy about their political views or religious views or whatever views that they are, and they are very pushy about it, and the tendency that they believe that they are always right and others are wrong. If others are wrong, they are tagged as stupid. So actually, in all honesty, that's actually what happens at this age. So, and that's very critical in the cognitive development in Piaget as well. So that's it. So this is actually the first part of adolescence. So thank you for listening. I hope you have or you understood my lesson. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And I'll see you on my next video. Bye for now.